right, let's get started. So we're gonna bounce around in a few different screens. I'm gonna try to make it as realistic as possible, but I might shorten parts of the video up for you to make it go a little faster if need be. But so real quick, I'm gonna have you take a look. So for starters, this makes some assumptions that you have virtual WAN experience, have it configured, just for the sake of time. Otherwise, we'd go way past the amount of time we have for this demo. So if you don't have experience with virtual WAN, if you don't have it deployed but are interested, we do have a full playlist on the Checkpoint YouTube channel. If you look for Azure Virtual WAN, you will see a full list of onboarding, the VNet configurations, and some other videos that we've done. We will obviously add that to this list, but please take a look at those if you haven't or don't have experience with virtual WAN. So that being said, let's take a look at my existing virtual WAN setup. I'm configured in West Central US. We will jump into there. I have obviously a fair bit of resources already configured. Like I said, just for the sake of time, here's my virtual WAN itself. The hub that's configured. My NVA, which is where the checkpoint devices live. Here's the instance info. If you go back and if you're not familiar, you'll go back and look at those videos. You'll see why. Here's the NVA name, which is important for later. So configuration information, which we'll come back to in a little bit as well. If we go back a step into the hub, that's also where we define routing intent, which is what determines what traffic gets steered into the NVAs for inspection. By default, we have all the private IP spaces listed there. You can make changes. You can modify that to your heart's content, as well as if I jump back a couple more steps, you will see the VNet peering connections that I have set up in here as well, just as an example. But we will not really be touching this stuff. This is more for egress traffic versus the ingress that we're going to show you. The host that we're going to be pointing to does live inside one of these virtual networks, inside these VNets. But for the sake of what we're doing today, we're not going to really focus on that. So that being said, one of the first steps, and we'll pretend like we're a new user going through the documentation like a good user should at times when the documentation is there for you. Do give you step-by-step guidance. This is the Azure Virtual WAN Deployment Guide. It does walk through the various steps, the prerequisites as far as configuring the virtual WAN piece of it, the routing intent and the NAT, etc. Step 8 also gives us the detail on the ingress traffic definition. So step 1 in the prereqs is to actually have an IP address configured in the same region as your NVA. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate that. Some of the stuff we won't actually even do. We'll just kind of show you what that would look like, just in case you have any questions when you're going through this. So I'm back in the resource group for my VWAN, which is the listing of resources. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. Search for public IP. Public IP address, create. I'm going to make sure it's in the same region as where I have my VWAN deployed. And I can just give it another name. Let's do IP number 4. IPv4. The SKU needs to be standard. And we're going to inherit our DDoS protection settings from the VNet that it lives in. I'm not going to give it a tag at this time. And go ahead and create it. This goes relatively quick. So while that's building, we'll jump back into our VWAN. Hopefully that'll be done by the time we get there. And this is how you would add an additional public IP address for ingress purposes to the VWAN. Bounce me out. So I'm going to go back to the VWAN, to the hub, into my NVA config, and I'm going to go under Manage Configurations. Under Settings, Internet Inbound, and then click Add. It looks like my IP address should be there for me to pick from. You choose the resource group where it lives. It's going to be in the West Central resource group, and there it is. NVA public IP4. Go ahead and hit save. And so that alone does not do anything for Ingress, and will probably end up just reusing one of the existing ones I have in here, but I just wanted to show you what that would look like if you're going to add additional IPs or add an IP. This is what the steps you need to take to do that. Once that is done, it'll get added to this list, and then you can then take action on it and make it an Ingress IP for your whatever you're trying to protect. That's for Ingress traffic. All right, the next step is to make sure that your management server is ready for API calls. So as part of the setup, and I think we'll talk about that, during the webinar itself, is that the configuration of the rule itself that allows Azure Virtual WAN to send us traffic or to do the ingress, the action is occurring via the checkpoint management server. And so we're going to do that via API calls. And so we need to make sure our management server is ready for API access. And so I'm in my Smart Console. I go to Manage and Settings, Management API, Advanced Settings, and you have some choices. I'm going to leave it at what it's set to right now, which is all the IPs that can also be used for GUI clients. If you don't know what GUI clients is, that's a checkpoint legacy term that says there's an IP list that is allowed to log into Smart Console and do administrative tasks. And so that's what I set it for. It's coming from my lab IP. This to be a little more extra secure. You can set it to any IP address as well, and then do restrictions via external means if you need be. But in my case, I'm just going to leave it at this. The other aspect to this then, what we're going to use to actually do the API calls is with Postman. If you don't know what Postman is, that's another thing. So you're going to be exposed to quite a few different things here. If you haven't learned about Postman or other tools like Postman, Postman is just a Google application. It's considered open source, free, that allows you to send API calls in a kind of a GUI format. It's kind of nice and it's easy to manage. It's easy to manipulate, to do work on your behalf. And so vendors and other organizations, and you can actually create them yourself. If you have APIs of your own, you can actually create your own what they call collections. And so Checkpoint has collections of commands that you can use to run certain API calls. And so we're going to use this to interface with our management server. So instead of actually logging into the Smart Console and doing things, we're actually going to log in via the API. And actually one thing I forgot to show you is I actually have a specific user, API admin with its own password, etc. That way I can kind of trace it better in the logs. I can tell what's been done with which user. I said that before. And so we can log in. You can kind of see the various things. It's kind of somewhat obvious types of things you would do if you're just to do a normal management login in Actions. It also has a full-blown management API to do other more deluxe or more customized selections. But today we're going to be focused in on this Azure Virtual WAN Ingress task. So first and foremost, we need to log in. So I'm just going to go to Session Management and Login. And we are using the Azure Virtual WAN collection, actually specifically the CME API collection. And I'll grab a GitHub page to that. So under the Checkpoint SW CloudGuard IaaS, which is the old legacy CloudGuard network security name, we have this CME API Postman collection, and you can download this and then add this to Postman, and then see that list of commands like that you see here. So we can, once you have it downloaded, you go to here to import and browse to that file and pull it in. It'll provide you with this list of commands. So first thing being first, we're gonna log in. I'm gonna send this command, It produces some output. The most important part is this SID. This is my session ID, which expires after 5 minutes if I don't make changes with it. I'm going to copy that. I'm actually going to click on this thing up here, which allows me to save these variables across other commands, so I don't need to be pasting it in constantly. Once I have that session ID copied down, I can then go and do other tasks. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we have a connection with Azure itself. So I have this already configured, but I'll show you what the process is. You'll go to this add an Azure account, and all this means is we're adding an account that allows the checkpoint management server to interface with your Azure environment. And so in the name field, this is just a name that you give it. This is not there's no requirements as to what needs to go there. It's really up to you. You need your subscription ID, your directory ID, the application ID, and the secret as well. Once you have that, you click send, and it creates that account and creates that tie-in from management into your Azure portal environment. So now we can use this connection, this account, to do the Ingress configuration. So now that we have that configured, once you have that tied in, we can go to add Azure VLAN Ingress rules. And the things you need to have is configured is the name of the rule that you want to configure, the source IPs, and 0.0.0.0/0 is from anywhere. The load balancer public IP that you were granted in the Azure portal. So we jump back to the Azure portal. That is this IP address. If I hit refresh, you'll see that third IP pop in there. There's that third IP that we created earlier. If we were going to create a rule for that guy, you would copy that one and paste that into the Postman here. And here's where you set your ports. In our case, we're doing 443. In addition to the rule that we're creating for Ingress, in the post command on the API side, you need to define the pieces. And so this is where it gets a little technical, and you can kind of follow it somewhat relatively simply. So accounts, and this is the account name we just created before. So this is that Azure Central US account, which ties management server to your Azure environment. The next pairing is the resource group. The resource group is the resource group that your NVA lives in. So we'll jump back to the resource groups in Azure. We'll just make this easier to look at. This is my, and it's very obvious that that's what that is, but this is the format that it goes in. If I click on it, you'll see this is where my NVA stuff is living. This is the name that you need to use in your API call. So you would copy that and paste that into that next line of your API call. You can see it's pretty long. And then inbound rules, that pairing is then tied to the NVA name, which we talked about before. NVA name, if we go back to VWAN, and the hub. This is just the easiest way for me to show you. I think it's the most obvious place to look in case you're questioning which name to use. It's right here inside the hub, the NVA, and that's the NVA name. And so that's what you will use in your command. So once you have that, I'm going to go ahead and hit send. It pops out a request ID. And I'm going to copy this request ID. And actually, this might get saved automatically, but I'll just go ahead and copy it anyway. As part of the collection of API calls, we can go down to get API request status. And I think that's the same one that I just picked. Let's see, 70, yeah, it's the same one. So it pulled it through. So now we can just hit send to see what the status is of that task we just ran, the API, the Ingress rule we just created. And here we go, result, request status is success. Successfully added Azure VWAN Ingress rules. I can go back then into this subheading or sublisting of API calls. And I'm going to check I'm going to go grab to see what it has configured on the system. And there we go. So it lists out that command I just ran, basically tells me what's configured. If you were to add additional ingress IPs or ingress rules, keep this in mind that you need to keep the existing in there as well and just add to it. So you cannot remove this one or replace it. It will not stack. It'll actually replace it. So you need to, whatever you are putting in there, you need to make it an additional stanza for your new rule. Otherwise it'll get wiped out. That's a key thing to remember. So once that is set, we can then jump back to our virtual WAN configuration, go to NVA configurations, manage configurations, internet inbound. Here's that ingress rule. There's the name, the port that it succeeded. And now we're ready to configure the NAT part of it on the Smart Console side. So we'll jump back in there, go into our NAT policy, and we're going to configure a single NAT rule, which I already have in here to save time, from my lab IP, going to that ingress IP over 443. You need to set the translated source to the local gateway internal dynamic object and make that a hide NAT. And in my case, I'm doing a static to a web server that lives in my VNets that are behind the NVA machines, and then I push policy to those guys. If you look at my security policy, just have a basic ingress rule. And if we jump to create some traffic to that website, look at my logs, and we should see a log entry for that traffic. And so there we see the traffic coming from my lab IP over 443 going to that external IP address, the NAT action that's occurring. So it's coming through one of the NVAs, and the destination IP is to my web server behind the scenes. This could also be a load balancer, so you could do load balancing behind the scenes as well, no problem. And that's it, you're set. Hopefully that was helpful. I think in the future, there's definitely roadmap items, or there's going to be a time where this will be a much cleaner, simpler process, but that is the method at the moment. Hopefully you'll learn something about APIs and our integrations with the management server and Postman. Hopefully you're able to learn a thing or two. Thanks for watching, and take care.